Nobody in that room was ready for what Jasmine Crockett was about to say. Her voice did not rise, but it cut through the tension like a blade. She looked straight ahead, not at the cameras, not at her colleagues, but through the entire charade playing out before her. And she asked a question no one else had the courage to speak out loud. Why are we here pretending to care about fairness in sports when we are literally voting to abandon over 600,000 children? You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Crockett did not yell. She did not posture. She simply told the truth. And in that moment, the whole hearing cracked wide open. If you want to hear the full truth, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It was supposed to be another controlled hearing, another neatly staged committee session, where culture wars could take the spotlight while the real crises stayed buried. Marjorie Taylor Greene had set the tone, a hearing about transgender athletes in women's sports, a topic that was never about fixing anything, just fueling outrage. But Crockett was not playing. She laid it bare, pointing out that while they fought over a handful of trans college athletes, hundreds of thousands of kids were about to lose Medicaid. Real lives, real stakes. But that truth did not fit the narrative, and the moment she said it, you could see the discomfort ripple across the panel. Crockett's calm fury only intensified when she turned her attention toward Greene herself. Weeks earlier, during one of Donald Trump's tariff flip-flops, Greene had made 17 different stock trades. 17. While the market stumbled, her portfolio soared. 29% returns, almost unheard of in such chaos. And it was not just luck. Crockett brought the receipts. She questioned how a member of Congress, privy to information the public never sees, could just happen to time those trades perfectly. Was it fraud? Was it insider trading? She never said Greene broke the law. She never had to. The implication was louder than any direct accusation. And that silence, that was the part that echoed. What happened next was pure theater. Republican Nancy Mace, sensing the fallout, jumped to Greene's defense. She accused you of a crime, Mace barked, demanding that Crockett's words be erased from the record. Parliamentary procedure kicked in, but Greene, oddly, seemed confused. The woman chairing the hearing did not know how to handle her own defense. She fumbled, stalled, asked again and again for the exact words. But there were none. Crockett had been careful. She never crossed a line. She did not need to. The facts spoke for them. The hearing screeched to a halt. Staffers and stenographers scrambled to review the recording. Tension hung heavy in the room as Republicans huddled, trying to salvage order. It was almost comical, this chaos over someone telling the truth too clearly. And when the dust finally settled, even Greene had to concede it was borderline. That was her word, borderline. Not wrong, not a lie, just uncomfortable. That was all it took to shake the foundation of that hearing. By the time the session resumed, the damage had already been done. Greene may have still held the gavel, but the control she once clung to had slipped through her fingers. She tried to recover, to shift focus back to her planned outrage over transgender athletes. But something had changed in the room. The cracks had widened. Crockett had not only challenged the purpose of the hearing, she had exposed the emptiness beneath it. And Greene knew it. You could hear it in her tone, see it in her forced composure. The mask was slipping. And then came the unraveling. Melanie Stansbury, another Democrat who had been simmering through the chaos, stepped in, not to grandstand, but to ask a simple procedural question. Had the motion to remove Crockett's words actually been withdrawn on the record? A basic requirement under House. It should have been a formality. Instead, it became a battlefield. Greene tried to move past it, brushing off the question, insisting it had already been handled. But the truth was, she had never followed through, and Stansbury would not let it go. Greene lashed out. "You are continually disrupting this hearing," she snapped, her voice rising with frustration. We were to stay on track, but the track was gone. The derailment had already happened, and no amount of gavel pounding could hide it. What followed was a full-blown procedural collapse. Voices clashed, points of order flew across the room, and Greene's grip on the proceedings melted entirely. This was not oversight. It was a circus. At one point, Greene accused Democrats of defending mentally ill men invading women's sports. It was a line meant to shock, to provoke, but instead, it revealed desperation. The substance of the hearing had evaporated, and all that remained was venom. Yet through it all, Crockett sat composed, her earlier statements untouched. Because the truth does not need to scream. It just needs to be heard once to leave an echo. Back behind the scenes, Republicans tried to reset. They cycled through witnesses, hoping to get something back on the record. But even as others spoke, the air never returned to normal. The audience watching from home, the staffers seated in the gallery, even the members on the panel, they all knew what had happened. Greene had been called out in plain, not with insults, not with slander, but with facts, and she had no answer. Then came the moment no one could quite believe, as Marjorie Taylor Greene stumbled through her final statement, tried to reclaim some control. She turned to the witness panel and said they were defending themselves against mentally ill biological male. The words dropped like a stone in water, not because they were shocking. Everyone had grown used to Greene's language, but because of what they revealed. This was never about policy. It was rage bait. It was theater. And Crockett had pulled back the curtain. Every lawmaker in that room felt it. Some tried to ignore it. Others quietly nodded. But none of them could unhear it. And Greene? She was still holding the gavel, but no one was listening anymore. Outside the hearing room, the whispers began to spread like wildfire. Not the scandalous kind rooted in rumor, but the kind born from quiet disbelief. People were not talking about transgender athletes anymore. They were talking about what Jasmine Crockett had done, about how she had walked into a hostile chamber armed with nothing but facts and focus, and made one of the most powerful figures on that committee scramble to keep up. This was not just a political spat. It was a shift, one of those rare moments when a voice cuts through the static and forces even the most cynical minds to pause. But that moment had a cost. As soon as Crockett finished speaking, the machinery of retaliation began to grind. Republican members whispered across the dais, calling for her words to be taken down, invoking obscure rules, trying to frame the truth as a personal attack. They wanted to rewrite the record, erase the part where a black woman from Texas had looked power in the face and said, "No more." But Crockett was not intimidated. She had seen this before. When truth makes people uncomfortable, they try to silence it. But what they forgot is that once truth escapes, it cannot be stuffed back in. And Marjorie Taylor Greene? She may have tried to play the victim, but it did not land. Her confusion over basic House procedure, her shifting story about whether or not Crockett's words had been withdrawn, and her inability to cite any rule clearly, it all painted a picture that was hard to ignore. She was not in control, not of the hearing, not of the narrative, and certainly not of her own defense. The irony was thick. A hearing meant to highlight government efficiency had turned into a display of how dysfunctional the government could be when led by someone unprepared. Members were talking over one another. Points of order were being ignored, and staffers were visibly flustered. Crockett, on the other hand, had followed every rule. She had never accused anyone directly. She had merely asked the kind of questions that powerful people hate, ones that make the public think. As the committee lurched forward, Democrat Stephen Lynch joined the fray. He did not he just asked why Greene was cutting off colleagues mid-question, wasting time on personal attacks instead of addressing issues like health care, which actually mattered constituents. It was like holding up a mirror, and Greene hated the reflection. She gavelled down, tried to drown out dissent, but the noise only made things worse. Every outburst, every deflection only strengthened the contrast between her chaos and Crockett's clarity. And in the background, the quiet support grew louder, members nodding, staffers exchanging glances. Even some Republicans looked uneasy, because deep down, they knew this hearing had spiraled not because someone broke the rule, but because someone followed them too well. Crockett's calm dismantling of the circus had left its mark, and no matter what Greene tried next, that truth was not going anywhere. The real twist was not that Jasmine Crockett had spoken out. It was that the system tried so hard to pretend she had not. For 20 long minutes, the committee was frozen. The official record was under review. The stenographer pulled aside. Republicans hunched in whispered conversation as if searching for a reason to erase her words. But erasing what? She had not accused anyone of a crime. She had asked logical, evidence-based, important questions. Still, they treated her truth like a threat, one so dangerous that it needed to be handled behind closed doors. That alone told you everything. And yet, while they scrambled, Crockett remained still. She had nothing to clarify, nothing to walk back. She had stated facts. Facts about children being left behind. Facts about stock trades made during a suspicious time. Facts about a system that protected the powerful while punishing the poor. Her tone had not wavered. She did not gloat or push further. She just waited, because when you speak from truth, you do not have to argue. You let the silence do the work. Marjorie Taylor Greene finally returned, gavel in hand, but the authority was gone. She declared that Crockett's comments were borderline, a word carefully chosen to avoid admitting defeat while still signaling discomfort. It was an attempt at control, a way to move past a moment without confronting it. But borderline meant the truth came too close for comfort. Greene did not have the votes, the rules, or the confidence to strike the words from the record. So she did what people often do when they lose control. She changed the subject. She tried to pull the hearing back into her chosen narrative, spoke of mentally ill men invading women's sports, repeated the same divisive rhetoric, hoping that volume would substitute for but no one was listening. Not really. The room had shifted. Crockett had forced them all to look at something they were not supposed to see, the hypocrisy sitting at the heart of it all. The hearings were never about oversight. They were about distraction, rage packaged as patriotism. Even as Greene called on the next speaker, her voice was shaky. Members from both parties were visibly uncomfortable. Melanie Stansbury tried again to clarify the rules, only to be snapped at, dismissed, accused of wasting time. But the truth was, they were all wasting time. Wasting it fighting each other while legislation loomed that would strip basic care from children and families who needed it most. That was the cruelty Crockett had named. And that was what they wanted forgotten. But something remarkable had happened. Crockett had not only pierced through the political noise, she had made it clear that the noise itself was the strategy. By exposing the circus for what it was, she reminded everyone watching that behind every headline and every argument, there were real people being forgotten. And if a hearing like this could not even handle a truth that uncomfortable, what else was being buried? By now, even the viewers at home could feel it. This was no longer about transgender athletes or even party politics. This was about something far deeper. Fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of accountability. And above all, fear of someone like Jasmine Crockett holding up a mirror and refusing to let them look away. Greene had all the procedural power, but Crockett had something stronger, credibility, and that had shaken the very foundation of the hearing. Every time Greene tried to reset the tone, the memory of Crockett's calm dismantling came roaring back. The witness list rolled on, but the energy had drained from the room. Even the most rehearsed testimonies could not mask the unease. Democrats and Republicans alike kept glancing toward Crockett, unsure whether to applaud her or brace for the next wave. But she did not grandstand. She did not interrupt. She had said what needed to be said. Now she was letting the truth settle. That quiet confidence said more than any speech ever could. Greene, still flustered, tried to reclaim the spotlight. She waved papers, mentioned fake accusations, and turned her frustration toward Melanie Stansbury again. But even her insults were losing their edge. They felt recycled, hollow. When she shouted about defending women's sports against mentally ill men, it landed not as strength but as desperation. The kind of desperation that rises when your script falls apart and the room no longer plays along. She still had the gavel, but she had lost the room. What happened next made that clearer than ever. Democrat after Democrat, in small gestures and quiet comments, began to peel away from performance. They asked questions about health care. They redirected attention to children losing coverage. They started threading Crockett's truth into their own statements, refusing to let the hearing return to its original script. And while Greene tried to shut it all down, it only made her seem smaller, because every objection, every point of order, only drew more attention to what she could not control. But perhaps the most stunning part came when one of the Republican members, who had spent the earlier half of the hearing backing Greene, leaned over and quietly whispered to a colleague, "She's right, you know." He did not say it loud. He did not say it into the mic. But he said it because somewhere beneath the loyalty, beneath the political armor, the facts still mattered. And Crockett had delivered those facts with precision. This was not a viral moment built on theatrics. This was a dismantling built on truth. Greene wanted outrage. Crockett brought accountability. And though the system tried to erase her, diminish her, and distract from her, none of it worked. The moment she finished speaking, the narrative shifted. The spell broke. The power that Greene thought she held had been hollow all along. And by the end of that hearing, everyone knew it. As the final gavel came down, there was no applause, no satisfaction. Just a heavy silence, a room that had witnessed something it could not unsee. Marjorie Taylor Greene closed the hearing with a tangle of words, still clinging to her talking points about transgender athletes, still trying to salvage the illusion of control. But it was too late. The chaos she had unleashed was not from protesters or political opponents. It came from her inability to answer one simple truth. Why were they there at all? Jasmine Crockett had forced that question into the open, and no one, not even Greene, could answer it. Members filed out. Some avoided eye contact. Some whispered to their staff. A few looked back at the chair where Crockett had sat, as if trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. She had not stormed out. She had not shouted anyone down. But she had changed the course of that hearing. And she had done it without breaking a single rule. It was not theater. It was leadership. And in Washington, that is far more disruptive than outrage ever could be. Outside the hearing room, reporters huddled. Some had been expecting fireworks, but not like this. They had seen Greene in action. They had seen hearings derailed by emotion, by anger, by noise. But what Crockett had done was different. She had peeled back the facade and forced a committee built on distraction to face the consequences of its own neglect. This was not just a political fight. It was a lesson about focus, about integrity, about what happens when someone refuses to be silenced just because the truth is inconvenient. Back in her office, Crockett did not gloat. She answered a few questions. She reiterated what she had said, that over 600,000 children were depending on them, and that while others played games with outrage, she had come to do the job she was elected to do. She knew the backlash was coming. Accusations, misquotes, spin. That was politics. But she also knew that somewhere, a mother on Medicaid had heard her words. A student struggling with health care had heard her clarity, and that made the risk worth it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, on the other hand, had to confront a different reality. Her committee, designed to project strength and control, had instead revealed her weakness. She had lost command of the hearing, of the narrative, even of her own arguments. She had been exposed not by scandal, but by facts, not by volume, but by calm. And now, every hearing that followed would carry the weight of that unraveling. Every decision, every comment, shadowed by the moment she was outmatched in the very room she built to dominate. This was not the end of their feud. It was not the last time they would face each other, but it was a turning point. Because in that one hearing, one woman had reminded Congress and the country that speaking the truth calmly, clearly, and without fear is the most revolutionary act of all. And now, the country is watching to see who will do it next.